Good afternoon and welcome to our workshop this evening. My name is Alma Castro. I am part of the CABE team, and we have with us today a couple of other support colleagues, Natalie Hernandez and Griselda Perez. So we are very happy you have joined us this evening. We will be supporting you from the CABE on the back end, behind the scenes. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us via the chat, and we'll be providing some resource and some support links. It's my pleasure to now introduce our facilitators for this evening's session, Rachel Ruffalo and Martha, is it Martha Burns?
Manuel.
Manuel Buenrostro, who will be here with us this evening. Welcome and enjoy your session, participants. Thank you. Rachel, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And good evening, everybody. As was shared, I should be sharing my screen now. Yes, my name is Rachel Ruffalo, and it's a pleasure to be with you all this evening. I'm with the Education Trust West, and I will have my co-presenter introduce himself before we begin.
Hi, good afternoon. Happy to be here with everybody. I am Manuel Buenrostro with Californians Together, and I've been working with Rachel on our engagement with the mathematics framework.
Great. So we're really excited today to share with you about what our engagement with this math framework process has looked like and what opportunities exist for still being involved and getting engaged in this process. So we hope that by the end of our time together, you will be inspired to join with us in this advocacy effort, and that we hopefully have done a good job explaining to you why it's so important that we engage in this process. So before we get started, just to tell you a little bit about our two organizations that are partnering in this work. As I mentioned, I'm from the Education Trust West. We are a nonprofit educational equity organization focused on educational justice and closing achievement and opportunity gaps through research, data, policy analysis, and advocacy. We are focused on ensuring educational justice for students of color, students from low-income communities, and multilingual learners or English learners in California. And Manuel?
Yeah, and I'm the policy associate at Californians Together. We are a statewide advocacy coalition of organizations from different segments of the education community, including other advocacy groups, research groups, some university partners. And our member organizations, we come together around the goal of making sure that we improve outcomes for English learners and support the expansion of multilingualism and bilingualism in California public schools. And along with that, along with promoting and supporting English learners comes making sure that we support cultural relevance, cultural skills and knowledge, and making sure that our schools are welcoming places for all students. And I think, so I'll talk a little bit about, to start off with our discussion of our engagement with the math framework, I think I'm gonna start off by talking a little bit about why this matters and why this is something important for us. So as we know, one of the goals that we have as advocates for English learners and for all students for that matter and equity is to make sure that all students in California have access to the full curriculum. That is the vision that we have for all of our students. So as educators and advocates for English learners, what this means is that it's important for us to get engaged in advocacy when it comes to other content areas that impacts our students to make sure that they have that access. Unfortunately, as we look at outcomes and what our schools are producing when it comes to the latest assessment results, we know that we could be doing better when it comes to math education in California. So about 87% of English learners in California public schools have not been prepared to meet standards in math in the 2019 school year. When we think about our African-American students, this is about 80% of students that have not met or have not been prepared to meet math standards. And outcomes for our students with disabilities are also stark. We're looking at 12.6% of students with disabilities that have met or exceeded standards in math. So we know that we could be doing better. Now, the good news is that we know from examples that we have seen from schools that better can be done and that things can improve if schools and educators have the right supports and the right guidance to move in the right direction. This is a message that Education Trust West highlighted in their report called Unlocking Learning, Math as a Lever for English Learner Equity. And I like this quote that we pulled out from the report. It says that we know achievement and opportunity gaps can be closed by implementing research-supported instructional practices designed for English learners and by providing teachers with the training, time, and support to transform their teaching. And this really has guided, this passion for making sure that we have equitable access has guided our engagement with the math framework and the vision that we have for what math can be for students across California. Next slide. So looking at the math framework, just like any framework in the state of California, there are multiple audiences that we keep in mind when we think about the advocacy for it and who it could reach. So at the very top, in terms of the audience, we're thinking about educators, like a lot of you here. For educators, any framework provides them with examples and strategies for instruction. So it provides that guidance. For instructional coaches, it provides strategies for implementing effective professional learning that can support those educators as well. For families, it could provide families with a high-level overview of the expectations and examples of what students are expected to learn at every grade level. And importantly, for curriculum development, a framework provides them with expectations around instructional approaches, assessment practices, and about what is expected in the content for the instructional materials. So for curriculum developers, there's a specific chapter in the math framework that provides instructional guidance for instructional materials. That is important as we think about the content that is available for districts to adopt in the first place. Next slide. Now, powering a lot of the work that we're doing are a lot of the key policy shifts that we have seen over the last 10 years. So we know that this work is not being done in a void. This is actually supported a lot by a lot of the foundation that has been set up by other policies that have passed in the last 10 years. So for example, the Seal by Literacy has been expanded over the last couple of years. It is something that has contributed a lot to expanding multilingualism in California schools. It is something that we want to make sure that we reference within the framework. When we think about the ELD standards and then the subsequent ELA-ELD framework that was passed into 2014, that really set a foundation for how we expect any curriculum framework to also make sure that any curriculum framework also references any relevant ELD standards. So for example, as we're looking at the math framework, one of the things that we've been pushing for is that wherever a math standard is referenced, we want to make sure that an ELD standard is referenced alongside that when that ELD standard is aligned to that math standard. So we want to make sure that there's that alignment so that it's not just the ELA-ELD framework, but that the math framework also provides that ELD connection for students. And then the EO roadmap, the Prop 58, and the Global California 2030 initiative have provided a lot of the broad vision for what we want for our students, both in making sure that our students have opportunities to be multilingual, so making sure that we are expanding dual language programs. And what this means for math is that as we're providing guidance within the framework, we also want to keep an eye out for making sure that there are strategies, materials, and resources for students that are in dual language programs so they can access the math content in both languages of instruction, and also making sure that we continue to promote that multilingualism and that assets-based approach that is promoted and that is highlighted a lot within the framework and the roadmap. Next slide. So this brings us to our broad goals around our math framework advocacy. And this is what has shaped a lot of the specific comments that we have provided. So when we started this project, we started with these two broad goals. The first one was to uplift the need for equity to be a driving force in the framework development, content, and implementation process. We wanted to make sure that equity was not just a standalone chapter, but we wanted to make sure that it was incorporated within all of the chapters of the framework. We also wanted to make sure that there was guidance and specific strategies to improve equitable access to standards-aligned, high-quality curriculum instruction for English learners. And we wanted to make sure that there were specific strategies, specific examples, and specific guidance that could inform both math instructors, but also other support staff that could be teaching our English learners. And I'll hand it over to Rachel.
All right, great, thank you. So this is the process. So the revision of the math framework is basically a 2-year process. And we are kind of nearing, I think we have about 8 months left in the second year. So just wanted to tell you a little bit about where the framework's been, where we are, and where we're heading. So back in the fall and winter of 2019, 2020, the Instructional Quality Commission and the State Board of Education approved a set of guidelines that were that continue to be kind of the foundational document to guide the work of the revision. And those guidelines were given to a committee of math practitioners that were selected from people who applied throughout the state. And this committee, that they were known as the CFCC, but we can just call them the Math Committee. They worked from February through December 2020, and they reviewed drafts that the writing team drafted, and they also received public comment from members of the public, including us and our partners. And then they gave direction to the writers about which comments they wanted to pass on to the writers. So which areas needed revision, which areas needed additions, deletions, and so on. And so that was a process that went on. Each meeting, they focused on a few chapters, and these were public meetings. And so we, as members of the public and really interested advocates, were able to tune into the meetings. We submitted written public comment that was shared with the committee members. We also participated in oral public comment at these meetings and were able to observe the discussions that took place. The committee approved a draft of the framework in December of 2020, and passed it to the Instructional Quality Commission. The Instructional Quality Commission then approved this draft to enter the first 60-day public review period, which is the period that we're in right now, February through April. And so right now, and we'll be talking more about how you can get involved, today in this review period. But the public has the opportunity to see the full draft and to provide feedback and comments. The IQC will next review and revise the draft based on public comment and approve the next version of it at the May meeting. And then it will go to a second 60-day public review period this summer, where the public will again have an opportunity to review the revised draft and engage in public comment. And then once that period is over and the revisions have been incorporated, the IQC will vote to approve that draft and send it to the State Board of Education. The State Board of Education is scheduled to approve it in November. So that's kind of the high-level overview of the process. We have mentioned that we've been working with partners in this work, and these are the different organizations that have been engaging with us. Many of them have helped to review chapters very carefully, have provided a lot of expert comments and feedback. Others have signed on to coalition letters. Many of them have participated in briefing meetings with us. We have learned a lot from them. We feel so privileged to have been able to work in community and in partnership with so many of these organizations. It's really been great to have folks who have the math expertise and who've been really involved in math education and the implementation of the standards here in California, along with people who are really expert on the English language development side, advocates who are more experienced in the policy realm, as well as partners who work nationally, like English Learner Success Forum and Todos Mathematics for All, who are able to bring a national lens to the work. And so we really feel that this has been a great strength of our coalition to be able to have so many diverse perspectives, including that of organizations that are that serve parents and that are very attuned to what they're hearing from parents in their communities. And we will tell you a little bit more about how you might be able to join this group. So some highlights from our advocacy over the last year. As I mentioned, we've submitted 7 public comment letters to the Framework Committee when they were meeting last year. We've submitted 3 letters to the Instructional Quality Commission when this was an agenda item on their meeting agendas. We had 19 different organizations sign on to our letters that we submitted for each of these meetings. We and other members of the coalition gave oral public comment at every meeting, and many of our recommendations have been incorporated into the draft. And that's probably the most important part of this slide, is that we're just really grateful that we've been able to kind of cultivate a trusting relationship with the folks who've been involved in the development of this framework. We've responded to specific inquiries looking for recommended language. We've been able to suggest some vignettes and other resources to be incorporated into the framework draft so far. Some of the things that we are excited or that we support seeing in this latest version of the framework is that there's definitely a more asset-based use of asset-based language when speaking about students, especially our multilingual students, and seeing their linguistic and cultural diversity as a real strength. We commend and support the incorporation of the English language development standards and strategies within the math content. We also acknowledge and appreciate that there's a discussion of systemic causes of inequity in this framework, that it is not just looking at outcomes and technical aspects of instruction, but really looking at holistic systemic inequities. We appreciate that the vignettes and examples are more inclusive of culturally and linguistic diverse students, although we do think that there's room for improvement there, as I'll share in a moment. And we also commend that there are many references to resources to support, to help educators develop cultural competencies.
Rachel, there's a question.
Hijo, pon atención, ¿eh?
Oh, sorry about that.
That's
There's a
okay.
question. It says, when you mean the public, does this mean parents too? How do we, the population, get to see the drafts of the framework?
Yes, great question. Yes, the public is everybody. It's parents, it's students, it's educators, it's everybody. And the current draft of the framework is available online. And I have a slide here coming up that shows the link. And we can also perhaps drop that in the chat. I don't know, Manuel, if you're able to drop that in the chat. Okay, yes, thank you.
So I'm sorry, there's also another question, if this is a good time. Knowing that only 12% of ELs meet or exceed math standards, do you think it's appropriate to include math as a criteria for reclassification?
Well, I'm going to defer to the experts on reclassification to answer that question. The reclassification criteria is not addressed in the framework. Those are local policies, and it's not covered in the framework. And I don't know if any of the experts wanted to address that one.
I would actually recommend that math is not included as reclassification criteria, mainly because its reclassification deals mostly with English language proficiency. And including math within that might muddy that a little bit. So it's just not what reclassification is supposed to be for. And also, I mean, I guess another point to make is, although those slides talk about proficiency in the math standards based on the CASP, we also know that within assessments, there's also other issues. So assessments might not be, they're a good measure to look at, but they're not the only measure to look at.
Yep, good point. All right. So some of the areas that we're focusing on for this 60-day review period, and these are kind of the areas of need that we see as needing more improvement. And that's the first one there is guidance for instructional materials. As Manuel mentioned earlier, there's a chapter on instructional materials that is very influential in guiding the development of instructional materials that will come after this framework is approved. And so we are focusing much of our comments on that chapter. We do want to see more alignment with the English language development standards and strategies, interconnected with the math content so that they're not seen as separate. There's a chapter that is titled Teaching or Engaging and Equitable Teaching. And we see that chapter there's a good opportunity to really center it on culturally responsive teaching. And there's a framework that's currently in that chapter that we think could be developed more fully to make it more actionable, so that if a teacher or a instructional leader were to be looking at the framework, it's really clear how you could implement culturally responsive teaching in a math classroom. We want to see some continued strengthening of vignettes and examples. Again, this is an opportunity to make the framework actionable for people to see what these practices can look like in a classroom. And lastly, this is a point that has come up largely from our partners who work closely with families throughout the state. And there is really a kind of a missing opportunity right now for not fully explaining how there can be greater authentic engagement of families and communities. We know through COVID that families have been essential partners and always have been. And the role, I think, has just been highlighted even more so during our COVID period. And so this is really an opportunity we see to build into this framework guidance around how to authentically engage families and communities to really strengthen instruction. All right, here are some of the ways that you could be involved in this review period right now, the public comment review period. So here's a link to the draft framework that's on the CDE website. The framework is long. There are 12 chapters plus a glossary. It's nearly 1,000 pages long. So you may want to focus selectively on the chapters. There's an online form to provide comments up to 1,000 characters, and there's a link on that website. If you have comments that are greater than 1,000 characters, you can send it to the Math Framework email address. And they recommend that you provide specific page and line references, saying that those types of comments are most useful. And the comments are due by April 8th, 2021. So you still have a couple of weeks. And lastly, I mentioned too that there's an opportunity to give oral public comment at these meetings, which is, I think, an important way to bring voice to the written work and to really show the broad interest and investment in these goals. And so we do encourage people to participate in the public comments. They, you call in and it's 1 minute long, so you don't have a lot of time. So in that time, we do recommend that you focus on why an equity-focused framework matters to your work or to your stakeholders. We think it's important to connect this framework to this movement for racial justice that we are experiencing. And there's this opportunity for the framework to be an important lever in advancing racial justice and educational justice for multilingual learners. We recommend that you focus on the particular chapters that are most connected to your work, that you provide some specific feedback, and that you if you have suggestions for resources and citations that would be good to include, that you add that as well. I think I'm handing it back to Manuel at this point.
So these are messages, but I would also take them as lessons that we might have known a little bit about them, but I think they've been highlighted even more with our work as a coalition providing comments on the math framework. So first, the first couple of things to highlight are just opportunities that engaging in the math framework have provided. For example, the fact that this is an opportunity to ensure that all of California students have access to standards-based, aligned, high-quality curriculum. It's definitely an opportunity to be able to do that with math. It is also an opportunity to recognize the assets that multilingual students bring with them to school, including the recognition that their experiences, prior knowledge, and cultural assets support stronger math instruction. And it supports stronger math instruction for those students, but it also elevates instruction for all of the students within that school. We also know that multilingual learners do better when they learn language in tandem with academic vocabulary and content. Language and content cannot be separated, and they're stronger together. It is also a call for educators and policymakers to design and implement culturally responsive policies and practices. And when it comes to overarching district strategy, we call for equity principles throughout, and we hope that the framework does that as well, so that the framework can guide districts' curriculum adoption process, professional development strategies, and also family engagement strategies. And there's also lessons for us as advocates. So I think this effort has reemphasized that it has reemphasized the power of consulting with experts and researchers to help develop our agenda and seek involvement of different stakeholders. I know that from talking to Rachel, we're definitely not, we wouldn't consider ourselves math experts, but by being able to bring in math experts or experts in family engagement or experts in other content areas, we're able to get that perspective and lens and actually provide more targeted specific comments that are helpful to the math framework writers, because we're able to not just say that this is lacking, for example, we're not just saying this is lacking ELD standards. We're able to actually call out those standards, or when we review a vignette or an example, we're not just saying that it's lacking an example from a diverse student perspective. We're able to actually provide a written example that they can incorporate within the framework. We have also learned that having new members of the coalition can open the door to new opportunities and new conversations. And this is important because it doesn't just impact the work that we're doing within the math framework. I think the work that we're doing here hopefully informs and provides a pathway to how we engage with other framework development processes and other processes when different entities update different content for California schools. Next slide. So here's a call to action again, and this is probably repeating a little bit of what Rachel said. But one, make sure that if you have time, take a look at the MAP framework. You have the language available on the CDE website. So we have the link there under number 1. I would encourage you to look at all the framework, but I know that we're all busy. So think about a chapter that might be more relevant to your work or subject area or grade levels that you are focused on. 2, make sure that if you have the opportunity, submit public comment. There's a link there to the public comment form so that you can submit comments to the Instructional Quality Commission before the April 8th deadline. And then lastly, if you want to be part of our coalition or at least stay updated on our work, you can click on that link and sign up to receive our information and emails. For example, for the public comment period, Rachel and other organizations have done a good job of getting feedback on different chapters. So we're able to provide that to coalition members so that when you provide public comment, you can provide your own public comment, but you can also borrow from the expertise that other coalition members have provided. Next slide. So again, here's a few deadlines and dates to keep in mind if you want to stay engaged within the MAP framework, and we hope that you will. April 8th is the deadline to submit public comment on the current draft to the Instructional Quality Commission. May 19th and 20th will be the next Instructional Quality Commission meeting. We don't know if the MAP framework will be on the agenda there, but we'll keep an eye out for that to make sure that if it's on the agenda, that we're able to provide comment and review the most recent draft. And then again, there's going to be another 60-day public comment period from June to July of this year. So that's going to be, I think it might be the final opportunity to provide public comment during that 60-day period. And then there's 2 additional IQC meetings in August and September. At one of those meetings, the IQC will take up the final version of the MAP framework, take any final public comment, and approve it for the state. So that's the end of the, so I think I just want to end by saying one more thing, right? So this is our engagement in the MAP framework. I think it's important to know that as we're engaging in the MAP framework, we're really seeing this as a model for other frameworks moving forward. So if we can make a MAP framework that really exemplifies equity, that has good strategies for English learners, that has good strategies on cultural relevance, that has a lot of the things that we know are important for our students, this can be a model for how we engage or how we make recommendations for other frameworks moving forward. And then the other thing that I want to mention is the importance of instructional materials. So chapter 12 in the framework focuses on instructional materials guidance. We know that is something that curriculum developers have been looking at. They've actually sent me and Rachel messages at some point or another because they're attending the meetings and they see our public comments, so they want to be able to reach out to us as well. Our work does not end as English learner advocates when the MAP framework is done. We have to make sure that within your own world, in your own districts, in your own counties, that you are engaged within the curriculum development adoption process within your own districts and counties to make sure that that content that districts are adopting have strategies that support English learners.
So one question that someone has says, do you have to pay to review the next workshop on the other dates? Oh, this has to do, I'm sorry, this doesn't have to do with your presentation, it has to do with just the general. After I read it, I was like, no.
Okay.
So if anyone has any questions, this is a great time to drop them in.
I'm gonna stop the screen share so we can see folks and also be able to drop in some links.
There's a question in the chat if they can ask it in Spanish.
Manuel, are you able to respond to a question in Spanish?
Claro que sí.
Muy bien.
A ver,
Creo que es Teresa Ortiz. Teresa, ¿gusta hacer su pregunta?
Sí.
El señor Manuel puede responder.
Ok. Sí, nada más quería ver estoy viendo que tienen diferentes lugares donde puede encontrar uno más cómo enseñarle a su hijo lo de matemáticas. ¿Cuál espacio creen que es más recomendable para, digamos, para que mi hija pueda como tener más estrategias para el matemática?
en español también, ¿verdad?
Sí. Oh, no, bueno, ella lo estudia,
Sí.
perdón. Sí, bueno, ella lo estudia en inglés, pero
En
sí
cualquier
le ha
idioma, sí.
batallado un poquito. Entonces, no sé cuál forma es para encontrar lo actualizado para que ella se ponga más al nivel.
Yeah, so the question from Teresa is are there any spaces or links to resources for parents to be able to provide additional math instruction to their students? I don't have that ready right now. So Teresa, ahorita no tengo una lista así lista,
Ajá.
no tengo algo listo, pero puedo responder después si me das tu correo electrónico y te
Sí.
mando links que
Oh,
he
ok.
visto en el
Ok. Ajá.
antes.
Disculpe, ¿esto se puede, o ustedes como lo están explicando, es recomendable usar YouTube para estudiar un poco matemáticas?
No sé, no sé la respuesta. The
No.
question is it recommended to use YouTube to learn math? I guess yo pienso que sí, depende del video y de quién está enseñando, pero
Sí,
depende de eso.
sí,
En lo que
personalmente no me
lo que voy a
gusta.
mandar, Teresa, hay varios videos para
Ok.
padres que he visto en matemáticas.
Ajá.
¿Puedo responder poquito en eso? Yo trabajo en una secundaria y en el condado del Norte nosotros luego usamos el Khan Academy, que es para diferentes niveles de grados. Y es bueno para los niños porque ellos pueden seguir y seguir, viendo los diferentes videos una y otra vez si no le van entendiendo. Y también están, me parece, en español.
Oh, ok.
Y yo también sé que, yo aquí vivo en el condado de Sacramento, yo sé que muchos de nuestros distritos han hecho videos para padres en
Ajá.
diferentes subjects. Disculpa que
Ajá.
mi español ahorita lo puedo hablar bien, pero
Sí.
académicamente se me olvidan palabras, por eso lo
Ok.
tengo que practicar. Pero diferentes distritos, por lo que ha pasado con la pandemia, han puesto
Ujú.
videos. O sea que también es posible que en diferentes distritos haya videos disponibles que están en YouTube o en otras plataformas.
Sí. Sí, ok, muchísimas gracias. Voy a buscar en este lugar o no sé si le dé mi correo y me pueda mandar algunos links para esto.
Sí, Teresa, ahorita te mando mi correo en el chat.
Oh, ok.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
We have about 2 minutes left, so if there's any other questions, feel free to drop them here.
I wrote a question in the chat now with parents asking for parent resources for the math, to help their kids with math. Is there going to be a section in the framework where parents have resources to go to? So I know the framework is typically written for the educators, but the educators can't do everything and we do need parent support. So will that be included in the framework?
We hope so. I mean, we do there, like you said, there isn't a chapter that's focused on parents or family engagement. However, there is a chapter on supporting instruction, and that is where we see where we see that chapter should be inclusive of families and communities as important supporters for instruction, that it's not just, shouldn't just be focused on teachers or school level personnel, that it really should be a broader inclusion of families and communities. So we've been, some of our comments and that of our partners are really focused on that exact question, that exact point. So we'd love for more folks to weigh in on that too, to communicate to the commission the importance and really this is an opportunity to show for this framework and future frameworks about the importance of families.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. That is our time. But as a reminder, we are recording this session, so that will be available for you to view in the portal. And I can drop the copy of the presentation too on the chat, just in case you didn't get it the other times that I dropped it. But I really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Manuel, for your time and your space. We really appreciate it. And the closing session is going to be at 6:30, so it's about 10 minutes, well, 9 minutes from now. So thank you so much, everyone.
Gracias.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good evening. Thank you, Cabe.
Thank you, Rachel and Manuel. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
At this
Thank
session.
you.
Thanks, Natalie, for closing.
Y perdón por mi español que no está tan bien ahorita.
Se entiende bien.
I'm going to end the session, so everyone's going to be booted out from here. Thank you. Voy a cerrar la sesión ya. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Feliz tarde.
Ujú.